Good afternoon, not that kind of Christian here. I have finally discovered a book that I've been meaning to read for ages. It's called Jesus and John Wayne. It's really about how the evangelical far right emerged in America and how this image of masculinity is kind of behind that. I'd like just to read a little from chapter 1, Saddling Up. You can find the book on Amazon, by the way. The path that ends with John Wayne as an icon of Christian masculinity is strewn with a colourful cast of characters, from the original cowboy president to a baseball player turned preacher to a singing cowboy and a dashing young evangelist. By the earliest 20th century, Christians recognized that they had a masculinity problem. Unable to shake the sense that Christianity had a less than masculine feel, many blamed the faith itself, or at least the feminization of Victorian Christianity, which privileged gentility, restraint, and emotive response to gospel messages. But American masculinity, too, had recently undergone dramatic changes, contributing to this sense of unease. Throughout much of the 19th century, when most men made a living by farming or otherwise working with their hands or owning small businesses, masculinity seemed more of a given. During this time, Christian manhood entailed hard work and thrift, and also the ability to exhibit proper gentlemanly restraint. Self-denial, after all, was a useful virtue for the entrepreneurial businessmen and industrious workers. But by the 1890s, the model of manly Christian restraint had begun to falter. A new corporate consumer economy meant that more men were earning a living by punching the clock, and self-discipline no longer promised the same payoff. As men moved to cities, the work they did changed significantly. For men whose strength had become superfluous, who no longer identified as the producers, their very manhood seemed in question. There were other disruptions too. Immigrants from southern and eastern Europe began arriving at the nation's shores, and new women started going to college, entering the professions, riding bicycles, wearing bloomers, and having fewer babies. In response to all of these changes, old ideas of manhood seemed insufficient. In their place, white, native-born Protestant men began to assert a new kind of masculinity. A rougher, tougher masculinity. Nothing less than the fate of the nation, even of white Christian civilization, seemed to be at stake. They attribute that quote later on. No one advanced this new American masculinity with more gusto than Theodore Roosevelt. As a young man, Roosevelt had been ridiculed for his high voice, tight pants, and fancy clothing, and derided as a weakling and pumpkin lily. But Roosevelt wanted power. Determined to reinvent himself, he went west, rechristening himself with the name Cowboy of the Dakotas. It was on the frontier that new masculinity would be forged. A place where white men brought order to savagery, where men served as armed protectors and providers, where violence achieved greater good. The Wild West could mould the exquisite Mr. Roosevelt into a rugged, masculine specimen. Perhaps it could do the same for all of American manhood generally. So the thinking went. But there was flaw in the plan. Even as Roosevelt was honing his masculinity on the western frontier, the mythical West was fading away. Rugged American manhood would need to be forged elsewhere on the frontiers of empire. This shift to a global stage was perfectly encapsulated in Roosevelt's Rough Riders, a volunteer cavalry who fought the Spanish-American War, a war that Roosevelt himself helped bring about. In this way, the new American imperialism was formed, and as a conservative effort to restore American manhood. I'll stop just there. Having just read that first chapter, or from that chapter, I must acknowledge who the book is by. As you could see at the beginning there, it's by Kristin Dumes. Yep, it was a New York Times bestseller, and that someone said on the front of it here, the book America needs right now. That was a Christy Stroop of Boston Globe. I cannot help but in reading that first chapter see, and I know I go on about the guy, and I know I make videos about him and whatever, but just listen to the stuff in that first chapter and listen to everything Stuart, Messages for Our Time, is preaching. Yeah. The kick-ass God. Yeah. I think the kick-ass God was there with Teddy Roosevelt. The wokeness he is so against. Woke. I mean, woke could be being concerned for other people, being concerned to make the world a better place, being concerned people get everything that is due to them, being concerned to live in peace and harmony with others, trying to make a difference in the world. That's what it could mean. But you see, if it meant that to Stuart, it would be weak, wishy-washy. Notice also there about the building of the United States, the economy changing, the roles of men changing. Note the emergence of the feminists and women wearing bloomers. Look at the emergence of women into the professions, even back then in Teddy Roosevelt's day. And above all, look at the fact that Roosevelt was considered, even by himself, weak. That phrase about him being something of a lily. Yeah. And here we get what American evangelical Christianity is trying to do. To reinvent the man. Yeah. Almost as though I would pretty much say for certain, if you were to ask Stuart, has modern man become emasculated? Have we become effeminate doing all those jobs that don't require the sweat of our brow and our muscles and all that lot? Bear in mind that Stuart was in fact once into boxing. Yeah. Could that be then that's what's behind a lot of what he preaches? Anyway, read the book. I'm going to go back and keep reading it to myself.